written a letter to Daddy. His address is heaven above. Instead of a stamp, I send kisses. Daddy.
Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make certain to hit the like and subscribe button and ring that notification bell to be among the first to receive updates on videos like this and many others. So, I've written a letter to Daddy. I want to talk a little bit about my father, but I also want to talk about magic. For me, magic is a little like playing the piano or singing or painting a picture. Now, most people, under the right training, could learn ballet. They could learn in the school of Leonardo da Vinci. People can learn a foreign language. People can learn a musical instrument, given time, given motivation, given drive. And yet you look at some people, and you go, wow, how did you know how to do that? How, Mozart, were you able to just pick up the violin or pick up the pianoforte or pick up the harpsichord and just play these masterpieces that rolled out of your mind? Leonardo da Vinci, how were you able to paint such beautiful paintings? How did you learn to do that? You look at Ella Fitzgerald, you look at Freddie Mercury, whom were not classically trained, and then they were almost perfect pitch. Maybe they were pitch perfect, but how did they learn to do it? They were savants. However, as I said, anyone can learn. It just makes it easier if that is in your bloodline. So today I want to talk a little bit about my magic and how I got a lot of it from my own father. My father has been deceased now for some time, and I didn't realize in those early days how very much I loved that man and how very much he taught me. He was a unique and kind and giving individual. He would give you the shirt off his own back if you requested it of him. I would pity anyone who would try to take anything from my father, but ask and he would give you because he was so very kind. My father also had intuitive energy, intuitive magic energy, and he always, to the best of my knowledge, listened to that inner voice, that inner dialogue. He would react to things before they happened. When my father was a boy, the Korean War happened. He was just 18 and he was drafted into the army. And like every good young American in 1950, he decided that he was going to go, but he went as a conscientious objector. He went going, I will defend my country, but I will not pick up a gun. I will not harm. I will not kill another human being, but I will go for God, for country. I will go to spread my truth to these people. And it was very funny because this machine that they would test the heart and they would test the oxygen, it had worked. It had worked continuously since the beginning of the draft. It had worked. And maybe even probably since World War II. It had worked just perfectly fine. And my father had a heart murmur. And had you not had a heart murmur, you would not have been able to have gone into the military. But my father waited in the line, waited in the queue, and the man in front of him passed with, it was fine. And just as he stepped up to the machine, it went haywire. Things were going crazy, gauges were going off. And the recruiter said, wow, I've never seen this machine do this, but you look healthy. And my father said, yep, I'm healthy. And he said, okay, fine, you're in. So my father went into the military, and he rarely ever spoke about what he saw because it was horrendous. It was war. People died. Friends, people that he had grown to love, had died. But my father drove the Jeep for an ambulance. He drove an ambulance in the motorcade. And he would be there to oftentimes pick up the pieces, which is metaphorical for a lot of things in his life. But one day in Korea, my father was standing next to his ambulance. And he heard this voice. He said it was an audible voice, but it was in his ears, but it was in his head, but he could hear it, but it was very real. And this voice says to him, "Walk across the street and get in the ditch now." And my father went, "Why would I do that? I wouldn't do that." The voice was more persistent, and it said, "I told you, get in the ditch now." And without question this time, my father walked across the street and got down in the ditch, just as the enemy artillery blew up his Jeep, blew it up, completely molten metal and burning rubber, blew it up. And that wasn't the only time that my father listened to his intuition. My grandfather owned a mining company, and my father was going about fine, and there was a blasting accident. The caps went off. This shrapnel, this big chunk of stone, went into the air and came down on his left side. It severed his arm completely off his body. Now, mind you, had it been even a few inches over, it would have done a lot more damage, and even still, it would have killed him. But it ripped his arm completely off, severed it right there. They bandaged him up. They took him to the hospital. They bolted him back together. They sewed him up as well as they could. They said that he would probably only have about 50% usage of that arm if he were lucky. And they put this big surgical steel bolt in his elbow. In his shoulder blade right here. And he told the doctor, he says, "Doc, you're going to have to take this out of me." The doctor said, "No, son. You are going to have to deal with this the rest of your life. That is surgical steel. That's in there." My father looked at that doctor and he said confidently, "If you don't take this out in 1 week's time, it's going to be so infected, you will have to take this out." The doctor laughed. He said, No, you'll have that the rest of your life. Of that, I am certain." My father said, "Okay, we'll see." A week later, my father was getting into the shower, and he could only shower with half of it because, again, he was bandaged. So he reached in to turn on the water. He went to turn on the hot, and his hand went over to the cold. He did this several times, 3 or 4 times, and it would jut over, and he questioned himself. He said, "Did I have a stroke?" Well, he turned around, he looked in the mirror, and according to my father, he said he was radiant, as though God himself were reflecting, shining through. And he, in his exaltation, raised his hands in glory to his God. And he began to praise and worship the energy that he reflected. And he went through those hospital halls, and the orderlies thought he'd gone mad. They tried to subdue him. They would come after him, and he would say, "No, I have to go see the doctor. I have to go talk to the doctor." He went into the doctor's office, and he said, "Doc, you better move. You better move this pin. You better take it out right now." And he says, "How are you doing that? That is surgical steel. How can you do that?" "Take it out." So he had it x-rayed. And that surgical steel bolt was bent like this. So, not only was the bolt bent, but my father had grown an extra bone. His shoulder was completely attached. There was a time, of course, as years progressed, and I've told this story before, so for those of you who haven't seen it, this is new and exciting, and for those of you who have, it's a revisit down memory lane. My father had Guillain-Barré, French polio, when I was almost 5. And then he slipped away into coma, and he went from bad to worse. But people asked me, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I said, "My father is coming home for my birthday." And these people would go, "Oh, bless. Oh, bless. Poor thing, he doesn't know." Oh, I shouldn't touch the microphone. But that's okay. They would say, "Poor thing, he doesn't know. Poor thing." And my father died in that hospital. They covered him up with a sheet. The doctor said, "We've done everything we could do. Mark the time of death, notify the family." And the nurse stayed behind to fill out the paperwork. The doctor left. My father said he was conscious the entire time, that he heard the entire commotion. And just as the nurse got to the door, she paused. There was something strange. And she put the clipboard outside the door, but she turned back around and she walked over to my father's bed. And for the first time in months, my father was able to clear his throat, which it's not uncommon for the recently deceased to expel gas. But this was again curious. So she picked up the corner of that sheet. And my father sat straight up in that bed and he says, "How are you today?" Well, the poor lady, she screamed and she fainted, passed out on the floor. The doctor, hearing the commotion, comes running back in, pale as a sheet, and he says, What happened?" And my father said, "Well, I don't know, Doc. I just said hello and she passed out." And the doctor, getting paler by the second, says, "Let me tell you, son, if a corpse would raise out of bed and talk to you, you would pass out too." So my father came home the day and the night before my birthday. And everyone asked me, my mother asked, she said, "Well, aren't you excited? Your daddy came home for your birthday." And I looked at her in earnest and I said, "I knew he was going to. Why would I not? I mean, why would he be excited? I knew what was going to happen." I knew what was going to happen. So I said, "I'll have him for 20 more years. A little more, but 20 more years." 20 years later, my father passed away the day and the night after my 25th birthday. And, it's not a sad story. It's a triumphant story because my father taught me a lot of what I know. It's strange and it's curious. We moved when I was 5, mostly to escape some darkness that was happening in the little town that I spent my early years in. And we moved to this new house. My parents bought this beautiful home, and my father went around this house with 3 things: red thread, sea salt, and olive oil. As we did so, he told me that the red cord was to bind us together as a family unit, and it would serve as a physical barrier against the outside world. That the salt was that we are the salt of the earth, and that it absorbs negative energy. And then the olive oil, the extra virgin olive oil, was the anointing of God. That anointing, that healing. And in my magical work to this day, those three ingredients are essential in much of my magic work. Pentecostals. I was raised Pentecostal. Pentecostals, unlike Catholics have magic too. They light their candles and they burn their incense and they direct their energy and then they walk away. But Pentecostals, they believe in ghosts and demons and spirits and angels and the unseen, and they firmly believe that it is real. Where I do not identify as a Christian, I am so grateful that I had the experience of growing up under that guidance, because it made me the man that I am today, and I proudly stand before you as the gentleman psychic. And now, here's a word from my friend the devil and Oscar. This joke comes to us from the late Reverend Richard-Lael Lillard. He used to tell this joke, as wonderful as it is. He would say, when you have to pee, you're a Russian. Then, when you're in the bathroom, you're a peon. And then if you don't wash your hands, you're a German. Because germs, wash your hands. Really, seriously, wash your hands. Back to you in the studio. Thank you, and thank you at home. Thank you so much, my beautiful friends, and make certain to check out my Patreon page at The Gentleman's House. Check out my website, The Gentleman Psychic, and we've got schools, so like I said, magic can be taught. With that, as always, I've been your host, Richard-Lael Lillard, The Gentleman Psychic.
Little devil, the whole world is wild about you.